Hey, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to Wowza Webinars, tackling virtual and hybrid live event streaming. We will begin at the top of the hour and we will be answering questions throughout. If you just want to check to make sure that the Q&A window, which is where you're going to be asking questions, is working for you, go ahead and type in where you're from. All right, Trinidad, Toronto, India. Looks like we got people from all over. Well, again, for those people who are still joining, welcome to another Wowza webinar, tackling virtual and hybrid live event streaming. We will begin at the top of the hour, so in just about 1 minute here with Tracy. But if you do have questions, we will be answering them throughout the webinar. So feel free to type them into the Q&A window. In fact, if you want to make sure that the Q&A window is working for you, like I've asked others, go ahead and just type where you're from in the Q&A window.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. We're gonna get started now that it is 11 o'clock, Colorado Mountain Standard Time. I'm sure it's different times where everybody else is tuning in from. Today we are looking at virtual and hybrid event streaming. This has been a topic of great interest over the past 18 plus months, and it's also something that's constantly in flux as the pandemic has continued to impact the landscape. So we'll be looking at both industry trends and what's required to reliably deliver live event streaming today. We're also going to touch on technologies such as low latency video and VR 360 streaming, and provide all the tips we have for reducing complexity and increasing revenue for your live events. So I'm excited to get started. To kick it off, it looks like we had just launched a poll. So if you could go ahead and answer that while I talk through what to expect. Here is our agenda for the day. There should be about 45 minutes of presentation with Q&A throughout. Please input your questions into the Q&A window. And we are also streaming live to social on our Facebook and YouTube live channels. Justin, if you could go to the next slide. So to introduce our panelists, my name is Tracy Ruther. I am Wowza's Content Marketing Manager, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by Barry Owen, Wowza's VP of Solutions Engineering. Say hello, Barry.
Hey, everyone. How you doing?
And also Brian Ellis is joining us, and he serves as our Senior Sales Engineer.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Great. And Justin, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so to get started, this graph is comparing predicted event attendance over the remainder of 2021 as compared to pre-pandemic numbers. And as you can see, we're definitely not back to normal, but we've come a long way since last year when everybody was operating 100% virtual. And this is also where hybrid events start to come into play, which give viewers the flexibility to either attend event physically or tune in online. Barry, I recently had a conversation with you about how with the live event landscape was kind of accelerated digital transformation during the pandemic. And that there were some tactics that organizations were using to quickly scale and adapt as they had to make the transition to virtual. Could you talk about some of those?
Sure. As a result of COVID and the ensuing lockdown and things like that, people still wanted to get the information from a trade show or a conference or things like that. So people had to adapt and be able to produce these as virtual events. So many people scrambled, came up with solutions. We were able to help quite a few customers who are putting on events, be able to do these in a virtual environment. And now that we're shifting back to people being allowed to attend things in person, you start to see, the hybrid environments. What I think a lot of these customers realized is that they can greatly expand their audience by still allowing the virtual aspects to continue, while still having that traditional in-person attendance as well. And I think there's a few things that go into that. You need to, for the virtual aspect, you need to try to engage those people as much as possible, and whatever you can do with the live streaming aspects of the events to provide some interactivity, to provide access, things like alternate audio tracks or closed captioning, things like that, to really make the most out of a very broad audience. Those are some of the things we've seen people do to kind of encourage folks that can't attend in person for whatever reason or another to continue to attend these things virtually.
Great. And what about scaling? How were customers able to quickly adapt so that they could meet this demand for going from, maybe streaming to 20 audience members to suddenly streaming to 400 audience members at a time?
Yeah, so, certainly by using a solution like Wowza Cloud, we offer kind of seamless scaling for folks. So, as part of the package, you can come in and you can set up your events and you can scale to as many viewers as you want. Anywhere from tens, hundreds to potentially millions. And that's really limited just only by the access you're willing to provide to those customers.
Okay, great. Next slide, Justin. Okay, so by live events, we are talking about anything from concerts and festivals to conferences, conventions, and trade shows. And I know that Wowza has customers producing live content across all of these categories. Barry and Brian, would you say that there's a lot of variance in the streaming workflows and necessary technologies for each of these use cases, or that it's fairly standard across all of them?
I would say the basic workflow is similar, although of course there are nuances with each, right? So, a scalable live streaming workflow is relatively straightforward. You have an encoder coming in, you have a transcoding and packaging step, and then you have a scalable distribution step, either via edge servers or via CDN. So very high level, it's similar. However, with all of these things, you're going to want different levels of interactivity, different levels of security. You may have paywalls, so there's a lot of nuances to each one that we can certainly help walk you through those things.
Okay, and I think we'll be looking into all of that much more comprehensively throughout this presentation. So we can go ahead to the next slide, and I think we just look at the standard workflow, which is what you were mentioning, Barry. No matter what, in most cases, when you're streaming a live event, it's going to include these 5 steps. You're going to capture the live stream with the camera. It's going to need to be encoded and compressed with either a hardware encoder such as Clearcaster or a software solution like OBS Studio. And then the next step, which is what we're really going to dive into today, is transcoding and packaging, which is where you really make sure that the stream can reach the largest audience possible and that it is ready for adaptive bitrate streaming and multi-protocol delivery. And then step 4 is also a very crucial one, delivering and scaling, which is where a CDN comes into play, followed by live video playback to your audience. And so ideally you get from capture to playback rather seamlessly, but I think the purpose of this diagram is to show that what goes on behind the scenes is a fairly complex process. And I know that we also offer live event support to help tame the complexities and make sure that nothing does go wrong at any of these steps. Barry, could you talk a little bit more about what a customer can expect when they're enlisting that service?
Yeah, and to take a little bit of a step back, obviously there's various steps here, and each one of those requires and involves some sort of connectivity, whether that be over an SDI cable or whether that be over the public internet. And as such, something can go wrong anywhere along the way. So the best advice I would give you is set up ahead of time. Give yourself plenty of time to test end to end. Try to test any failover scenarios you might have, and just do your homework. Spend a few hours ahead of time, and you'll have a much higher likelihood of a successful event. That being said, things can still go wrong. And we have live event support packages where we will be with you every step of the way. We will help you with those initial tests and setup. We will be able to respond if something goes wrong during the events, and help you ensure that your event is successful as possible. So we have a lot of expertise here. It's good to have an expert in your back pocket during these things. And maybe you do that for your first few events, and then maybe you got it dialed down and you're good to go, and that's fine too. We're here to help you however and whenever you need it.
Do you have any top tips to kind of make sure that everything goes smoothly? What is your number 1 or 2 top recommendations?
Yeah, the biggest recommendation is to make sure you test it, right? Test it in the environment you're going to do it in. If you're at a venue, test it at the venue. You'd be shocked what happens. I mean, people forget to plug cables in. People forget to plug the SDI cable into the encoder. Things happen, and things get confusing. And when you're stressed out at the event, so just get there early, hook everything up, get everything going. Watch it from end to end. Have somebody in another geography test the playback, make sure it's looking good. So just test ahead of time is the single biggest thing I would say.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then to jump farther into one of the steps of this process, Justin, could you go to the next slide? So transcoding and packaging, as promised, we want to look at that a little bit closer. Brian, could you explain to us what transcoding is, why a live event producer might want to transcode their stream, and what solutions Wowza offers to this end?
Yeah, sure. So transcoding, I guess, what is it? It can mean a few things in a few different use cases, but generally speaking, the transcoding is going to give you the ability to modify or change the underlying codec of your video source. But probably more relevant to this audience group, or equally relevant, is the ability to provide adaptive bitrate streaming. So think your source encoder is a high resolution, high bit rate, call it 1080p stream from your encoder, and giving you the ability to then create multiple profile renditions on the outbound side. So creating a 720p rendition, 460p, 480p, 360p, etc. And that really gives you the ability to provide not only an adaptive bitrate experience, but also gives you the ability to cover a wide range of variations in the client playback environment. And so if you have users on reliable Wi-Fi, on a desktop PC, they may have the ability to ingest a higher quality, higher bitrate stream than the users consuming the content from a mobile device that may not have the strongest network conditions. And so the transcoding is really providing that flexibility of an adaptive bitrate playlist on the outbound side, and the stream will be auto-correcting or self-correcting to the best available bitrate for each user based on their network and device requirements and environment. Additionally, it gives you the option to repackage the stream to multiple stream protocols. So think HLS and or MPEG- simultaneously, giving you more ability to cover a wider variety of playback environments and playback devices.
So it sounds like it's definitely about a high quality viewing experience, but it's also can help with scale by making sure that users on different devices are able to play back the stream by supporting different protocols.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on that in the next slide. I think it sets you up for the best path to success for delivering the stream into the scaling layer of the workflow, that being the CDN or edge servers. And by setting yourself up with a solid transcoder profile and repackaging to the correct stream formats is going to give you the ability to then scale through the CDN to a variety of additional users and additional playback environments.
Okay, well, great. On that note, I think we can just go to the next slide. So for quality and reliability, we touched on how a streaming media server might help provide a higher quality viewing experience, but what about reliability? What's needed to ensure a reliable stream experience when delivering a live event?
Yeah, I think the most, the seamless or most widely adopted way to distribute and scale your video content is through a content delivery network or a CDN. And this can cover, two factors when you think about scaling. One being just a large audience. So you have, tens or hundreds of thousands of concurrent viewers watching your stream at any given moment. It's critical that you're leveraging a CDN to dynamically scale the video across the large volume of users. And then equally important is to geographically scale. And so audience size may not be in the hundreds of thousands, but you may have users in multiple continents or geographies throughout the world. And it's really important to have infrastructure that can scale through the geographies as well, not just to a high volume of concurrent viewers.
Okay, and so what does Wowza offer as far as content delivery network solutions go?
Yeah, we offer a Wowza CDN, which is integrated in our streaming cloud platform as a service, and can be also integrated with our server-side software, and that gives you the ability to scale both high volume viewers as well as geographically dispersed viewers, specifically for the live events and live event broadcasts.
Okay, great. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so that brings us to everybody's favorite subject, low latency. And the thing about low latency that I think we at Wowza like to caution people about is that everybody wants it, but not everybody needs it. And if your live event's going to be perfectly fine with a 30-second delay, then we'd really recommend sticking with that rather than adding additional complexity to your workflow. But there are some scenarios where low latency and even real-time streaming is absolutely critical. So Barry, could you tell us about some of the use cases you've encountered where low latency streaming is table stakes?
Have to unmute first. Yeah, so obviously there's different use cases, right? If you're just doing a general broadcast that's, potentially either a live event or maybe even a recorded event played out as live, latency may not be as big of a concern to you. So, but if you're doing something that you're doing any sort of interactivity, or you're expecting second screen to keep up with broadcast for whatever reason, whether it's an auction, potentially a live sports event where you want to minimize that latency so you can have people, keeping up with Twitter or whatever it is. There's ways to drive that latency down. Most of these ways have some sort of a cost. So the most efficient, most reliable way has been proven to be, kind of a standard latency between, 15 and 30 seconds will give you probably the best end-to-end experience for everyone. But we've gone to great lengths to begin to drive those latencies down and still achieve high quality, high reliability. The first thing we typically do is just drive the HTTP segment down, right? So going from 10-second segments to 6 seconds or 2-second segments will drive your latency down considerably. And in some cases, that's good enough. If you're looking to go, hey, maybe you just need 7 seconds to keep up with traditional broadcast, something like that, they may be good enough for you. Also on the horizon are things like low latency HLS that will drive that latency down into the 2 to 3 second range, but still allow you to scale using a traditional CDN. So, there's some trade-offs there and you got to be careful. And there's, a more limited number of platforms that you can use, but it's certainly an option and it's getting better and better all the time. And that exists, low latency HLS is created by Apple. It's becoming final and more people are supporting it. So that will continue to grow as an option in the future. Most recently, and for the ultimate lowest latency, WebRTC is a great option for scaled playback. So, we will be introducing real-time streaming at scale with Wowza Streaming Cloud and a WebRTC-based delivery network. And this will allow you to achieve, latencies as low as 1 second globally with your live stream. So, that remains probably the best way to get the ultimate lowest latency is using something like WebRTC, which is UDP-based. And I'm speaking of delivery formats here. There's a bunch of different ways to get content into the system. I see we have a question pop up about SRT. So for Wowza, for the most part, SRT is an ingest protocol. So SRT is great to get things over lossy network into the system. There aren't any SRT CDNs, however, to distribute SRT out to clients. Potentially something we would look at going forward, but for now, WebRTC fills that gap nicely, and you could use an SRT to WebRTC workflow in the future to do something like, you ingest via WebRTC, you can ingest via RTMP, you can ingest via SRT, and then you can output as WebRTC, you can output as low latency HLS. So there'll be many options to mix and match, and it may depend on requirements of your workflow. It's a lot easier to do things like captions and advertising and some of these other things with standard HLS than it is with low latency or WebRTC. So depending on what your requirements are and what you're looking to do may also influence the protocol you choose on the output side.
And so like what kinds of live event scenarios has your team worked on where maybe WebRTC would be a better fit than tuned HLS? Like what scenarios was that level of interactivity really required?
The two that pop into my head immediately are auctions and gambling. You know, auctions, obviously you want the stream of the event to be as close as possible to the actual bidding process. So driving the latency down as low as possible matters there. And, you know, same for gambling, that typically for gambling and betting, you know, the lower the latency you can drive down, the more bets you can take in a given period of time. And you know, also the more events you can run in a period of time. So anything they can do to drive those numbers down typically translates into profit for the provider.
Okay, and then also I think I've heard you in the past talk about some more hybrid workflows where maybe a larger broad audience is viewing a live event with a little bit of a delay, where there's a smaller interactive audience that.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Think of like a high-end auction, right? Where maybe you're going to auction off, you know, some high-end artwork or something like that, or cars or whatever it is. You know, there's people who just watch those for fun. It's interesting to see. It's cool to see the stuff come across the auction block, but they have no intention of bidding or interacting. So, you know, those people don't necessarily need to see a low latency feed, where maybe the 50, 100, 200 people who are actually registered bidders are the ones who see the low latency feed. And that's certainly something we've seen is in the auction workflow in particular, you know, people who are actually engaged and going to be bidding and things like that will be on a WebRTC or some other low latency feed. And the provider also broadcasts that to a larger audience. I mean, you've probably seen things like the Mikomoto auction and things like that. And these are ways to, you know, provide entertainment or expand their brand or expand their audience to many, many people, but still make sure they take care of the actual bidders.
Okay,
Hey,
cool. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
We had a question that kind of relates to that came in from Dory. She wanted to know what currently exists or what's in the works for a many-to-one and simultaneously one-to-many type of video streaming. And her example was, let's say, having a page where a musician can perform to fans, while at the same time you can see those fans and their reactions.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're about to put out a blog post very similar to this that will hopefully answer your questions. No, so we are working on some of these hybrid watch flows for things like watch parties, where you have, you know, a main video stream, but you also have the ability for a few or groups of few people to interact. And, you know, you can think of various use cases that certainly for the people watching a musician. You can also create things like she's describing, or she or he, sorry, is describing, you can have a waiting room or like a virtual waiting room. So fans have the opportunity to perhaps interact with the actual artist or interact with the presenter on some sort of a controlled basis. And, you know, because you really don't want the situation where you have 50, 60 people screaming at one person. It doesn't work very well. You know, 50, 60 people can be talking amongst themselves, but if you're really trying to get the situation where you have, you know, a performer or a panelist or somebody like that that's answering direct questions, you need the ability to kind of moderate that process. So there's a lot of stuff in the works there. We're working with a few different partners to provide some really cool features as far as that whole watch party breakout room, you know, moderated text or video chat scenario. So stay tuned and look for our upcoming blog post, probably
Yeah, so-
early next week.
Yep. We have a blog post early next week, and also we're going to touch on this a little bit more on the monetization slide. So we'll get into it more there. Brian, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add for low latency or.
Yeah, no, I think Barry covered
Okay.
it quite well. And you know, similar to what we're describing here, specific to Dory's question was, we see this in like focus groups where you might have, you know, breakouts. You know, you have a large audience watching a live stream, and at the end of the event, you can break out into smaller groups of interactive video communication. So similar concept, just a different use case. I think it applies to other verticals other than just, you know, concerts or musicians as well.
Okay, great. Next slide, please, Justin. So talking about interactivity, I think another form of interactivity and immersion that we've seen an uptick in lately is virtual reality 360-degree streaming. And Barry, I've talked to you about it a bunch. I know that this technology didn't initially live up to its hype. It was a big buzzword and people kind of felt like it didn't really pan out at all. But it sounds like you think that that might be changing and that the technology is more primed where we're at now to really take hold. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really fun use case actually, and you know, it kind of got a bit of a false start 3, 4, 5 years ago with, you know, various providers. I probably have 5 different 360 cameras in my office with companies that have gone out of business for one reason or another. And I think it just got to the point where, you know, both on the camera side and really on the device side, the headset side, the quality just wasn't there, and that quality has steadily improved. Now it's a real nice environment. You have 4K headsets, you have 8K headsets, you have 4K cameras, you have 8K cameras. You're far more capable than what you had a few years ago. And we've been able to build a few solutions for people recently using 360 workflows with a combination of low latency, and typically in some of the cases there's an interactive element as well. One of the examples is, you know, virtual real estate tours, right? So someone will be they'll literally be walking through the property with a 360 camera, live streaming that via WebRTC to people watching on an Oculus headset, who can then have an audio chat back with the operator to, you know, go to a different room or things like that. And all the while they're able to get a whole 360 view of whatever room or, you know, potentially part of the property that person's in. So it's a really interesting use case. And for the customer, it was really good timing. They started developing this kind of right at the beginning of the COVID issue. And, you know, they were able to continue, in this case, they're a commercial real estate vendor. They will continue to be able to show people properties and things like that throughout the pandemic by this. We're also working with customers doing specialized education and training, such as, you know, being able to do a 360 view of a surgery happening or a medical procedure, and allowing students to watch and kind of choose what they're looking at, the area that's most relevant to them. So there's some really cool use cases here. And then, you know, purely from the entertainment perspective, it's pretty neat to be able to go to watch a sporting event or a concert with a 360 view and be able to, you know, choose what you decide to look at versus a fixed camera. So it's pretty neat. And there's some great use cases, and, you know, not all of these require low latency. You know, you could certainly stream a 360 view of a concert to millions of people versus standard HLS. And those who choose to do the interactive kind of zooming around could, and those who just want to watch a static view could also. So, you know, it fits many use cases, and it's I think you'll see more and more of these things in the future.
Yeah, and it seems like as we move more and more towards hybrid and virtual events, we're just going to need to put more energy into making sure that the remote viewer's experience is at least competes with the in-person experience, which VR360 can help kind of up the ante in that direction. Great, I think we can go to the next slide on this one as well, Justin. Okay, so security and content protection. So in the current atmosphere of everything being online and with a lot of complex environments being developed like that of a hybrid event, how do we ensure secure video streaming?
Yeah, so this, I saw a couple questions pop in about security as well. So there's various levels of security you can deploy within Wowza streaming solutions. So typical things you can do are, basic stream encryption. So you can make sure the stream is encrypted end to end. You can do token authentication. And what token authentication do is it provides unauthorized users from intercepting that URL and being able to play back that stream. Probably the ultimate security is industry standard DRM protection, where individual customers, individual people playing this need to get a key from a key server at playback time to be able to play back any of the content, and that content is fully encrypted and can't be sideloaded or stolen midstream and decrypted and played back by anybody else. So various flavors of doing this, various ways to do it. We can also protect on ingest using things like RTMPS and authentication on the ingest side. So you can actually wind up with an inherently secure platform from end to end. So kind of pick the level of security you're comfortable with, and we can help you choosing what's right for you. Other things that aren't mentioned here that are possible, things like GeoIP blocking or IP whitelist, blacklist things for, super narrowing down, along with some of these other technologies to make sure those streams can't be viewed by anybody that it's not intended to be viewed by.
And this question might be a little bit higher level than you're used to, but I think a lot of people think of security and they think of like privacy and sensitive data, but how does security relate to monetization?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, if you're going to be putting up a paywall or running a subscription service, you don't want people to be able to view those streams without first passing through the paywall or a subscription. And you would typically do that with a combination of encryption and token authentication to make sure that only those people authorized or only those people who have paid what they need to pay can see the stream.
Hey, Barry, we had
Yes,
a
sir.
question coming in, and I'm not sure if this was the one you were mentioning before, but the question was relating to someone who's currently evaluating, I believe, Wowza streaming engine, and they're having difficulty implementing load balance and HA setup to cater to 10,000 concurrent users. They're looking for an on-premises solution. I can go on here. The WAN of our enterprise is built on traditional MPLS network, and we still have not moved to an SDN with local breakouts. We have a couple of internet gateways on our network, and they want to know how they can use either whether it needs to be an on-prem deployment or how they could use Wowza Streaming Cloud service without straining their WAN.
So there's a lot in there.
Very true.
My first thing would be call our professional services team, and they will help you work up an architecture. You can certainly do an on-prem deployment with Wowza streaming engine and have effectively a high availability set up on both the transcoding packaging layers as well as the edges by configuring scalable origin edge network with a load balancer. So that will work. Obviously you're going to have to figure out some of the topology within your network, how to deploy those edge nodes and perhaps those edge nodes might be even connected via VPN to the origin, but it can all happen. And we can certainly help you with that. If you're looking to do some sort of a hybrid with either on-prem engines and using cloud to scale, or being able to burst to cloud or something like that, those are also scenarios, but you will require, some internal to external connectivity to get to cloud or to get to the Wowza CDN. So, again, we can hook you up with a sales engineer such as Brian, or we can get you in a professional services engagement and really help you nail down that architecture.
Thanks, Barry. Definitely a long question there, but certainly something for professional services. We had one previous question, if you don't mind me going to it, related to the VR portion that we had just passed. But they were asking if we could explain a little more about how we can better VR stream with Wowza. They were asking basically, can we provide multiple camera support or something more than what they're currently getting by just going to YouTube?
So typically there's several ways to create a VR stream in the first place. Those are, pretty much beyond the scope of what Wowza does. We take the resulting 360 stream in and we can process it. You can stitch multiple cameras together to create a VR stream, or you can use a single camera that kind of does stitching internally. And, we can support either of them. What Wowza sees at our end is we just see kind of a fat, oddly shaped stream that we can then process through. And of course, it's up to the player to interpret that stream and provide you the right viewport and things like that. And that player can be an HTML5 player that you can pan around in, or it can be a headset that understands the format to kind of deproject it into a flat space so you can see it. So again, happy to get you in touch with a sales engineer. We have one sales engineer in particular who has worked on tons of these workflows and understands a lot of the nuances and what's involved. You typically do need a special player, particularly if you're looking at doing it on a headset. Some players support it via HLS. If you're looking to do some of the low latency workflows like I talked about, there's a few players that do support WebRTC on an Oculus or another headset.
All right, thanks, Barry. Tracy, should I go to the next slide?
Sure. If we're good on questions, then we can move on to the next slide. So just to look a little bit closer at security and at kind of the most sophisticated security measure that you mentioned, Barry, this slide is focused on digital rights management. Could you tell us about how DRM works with Wowza's products?
Yeah, so Wowza has the ability to work with many different DRM vendors. Most of the prominent DRM vendors have a Wowza module, Wowza connection. The way it works is, as the stream comes in, of course, it's unencrypted coming from the device. It comes into Streaming Engine or Streaming Cloud. We call out to that service to get the encryption key. We encrypt the content, send it out to the player, and we can support a whole bunch of different formats. And the nice thing about these formats is the basic encryption format is the same. It's really how the keys are managed that is unique, and that allows the clients to then also integrate with the DRM provider to manage key access and decryption. It seems complex. When you think about it, there's a lot of moving parts, but we make it really simple for you. It's very straightforward for us to get it set up, and we can help you kind of every step of the way make this happen.
And what types of organizations or use cases do you see DRM playing the most critical role?
It's interesting is, DRM used to only be kind of a requirement for broadcast and OTT and things like that, where people are doing, movies, TV shows, potentially sporting events. You're starting to see it come into a much broader area. So corporate communications, healthcare, because it's just a very secure way to handle your streams. And it's not a big lift to implement on the player side or on the Wowza side, honestly. And people are finding it, worth the time and effort to really protect their content.
Awesome. Brian, do you have
question there?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Tracy.
Go ahead.
Someone had asked, and they just wanted to verify, I think, whether the DRM service can be deployed on premises using Wowza's streaming engine.
Yeah, absolutely can.
And Brian, did you have anything else to add to the topic of security or digital rights management?
I think Barry covered most of the high-level bullets. I guess I'll just call out that within Wowza's environment and hooking into the third-party DRM modules, we have support for a variety of DRM technologies today. So they're protocol specific in many cases. So for example, HLS requires Fairplay, Dash Widevine, Microsoft PlayReady, or a flavor of common encryption. And all of those flavors can be supported through Wowza and in either the cloud environment or streaming engine.
Okay, awesome.
And one other question related to that. So can this, when we talk about it in terms of Wowza streaming engine, can this be on premises and completely offline for it to work?
Kind of, sort of. So if you want to use true DRM with a key provider and a key management server, both the encryption node, which is streaming engine, and the decryption node, which are the players, have to be able to get key from somewhere. Now, you can certainly stand up your own key server inside of your environment, so inside of your firewall, but they need to be able to get a key somehow. There are ways to do encryption without DRM, where you can use a fixed key. They're not as secure, but if you're in complete control of your environment, maybe that's an option. So there's not a generic answer for that question, but there's complexities on both sides you'll have to manage if something can't get out to, the internet and or a service, but there are options.
Thank you.
I also see a question pop in about delay with DRM.
Yeah, someone was asking, what's the delay end to end when implementing DRM?
It's very minimal. So I will note that, traditional DRM requires Dash or HLS, right? It doesn't, WebRTC doesn't use DRM. It uses a different mechanism to do end-to-end encryption. So it is in fact secure, but for DRM workflows with HLS or Dash, it's a frame or two. It's very minimal. The encryption step happens in real time as the stream's being packaged. So you're not gonna add seconds of delay or anything like that.
Great. So I think if we're good here, or do you have another question, Justin?
There was one other question that came in. If you want, we can answer this at the next slide.
You can go ahead.
Okay. Toby was asking, he was curious more about SLAs. Are there SLA differences by latency approach?
No, so we don't offer an SLA based on the amount of latency because there's just too many things we can't control. As streams go over the public internet, things can happen. So there is no SLA as far as you're guaranteed to get 2 seconds or less or 10 seconds or less or whatever it is. What we do offer SLAs on is just the overall stability and uptime of our system. So yes, we have SLAs for, the availability of Wowza Cloud or the availability of the CDNs or the availability of our distribution network. So at that level, yes. At the specific to the latency level, no.
All right, thank you.
And I think you can move to the next slide. So this one touches on, we had some questions coming in about like on-premises deployment. So Brian, I'm gonna send this one to you. We've seen an industry-wide shift towards cloud-based solutions. And I know at Wowza, we've been investing in our streaming cloud service to support this demand. But there are also some scenarios where a streaming server software like Wowza Streaming Engine might be a better fit. How would somebody go about determining which route is the best for them?
It's a good question. I think there are a couple of key factors. One is, how much ownership in the environment do you want to have responsibility for in terms of the server infrastructure, the server software, the edge infrastructure to scale and kind of distribute your video content. And that's a big factor. If you are looking to own and control the entire workflow, the streaming engine software, server-side software is a great option. It gives you, ultimate flexibility to customize and to control every step of the way throughout the entire workflow. Additionally, there may be environments where a cloud-based solution just doesn't work, whether that's an enterprise or government local network where the stream is perhaps in an offline environment and needs to be controlled outside of public CDNs and public services like Wowza Streaming Cloud. And so those are the two biggest reasons that would drive someone towards a self-managed, self-hosted kind of build your own environment, is really about controllability and the underlying environment restrictions that may not allow for a cloud service. That being said, in the cloud world, there are huge advantages in terms of managing the scalability of an origin layer and having the ease of implementation and reducing time to market of new products and new solutions. And so for example, our streaming cloud has a full suite of APIs, REST APIs that can hook into existing front-end management tools or customer client playback environments. And in many cases like auctions or e-commerce businesses, their expertise revolves around the monetization or the specific auction vertical, whether that's cattle, art, whatever that is. And they're not looking to become the next streaming expert. They want something that's easy to implement, reliable, and has a effective orchestration layer. And that's where a real cloud solution would give you the biggest advantage there.
Okay, great. And Justin, if you could go to the next slide. I think that dovetails well into just this basic workflow, which shows kind of how Wowza Streaming Cloud and Engine can both play the same role. And it also shows our other technologies along the way. Brian, could you just talk us through this quickly?
Yeah, sure. I think this is just a great visualization of the entire conversation we've had so far. If you move from left to right, there's the event happening. There are cameras and encoders capturing that and compressing that video. Then it has to be distributed somewhere. So into Wowza Streaming Cloud as a service or Wowza Streaming Engine as a software. And that's where your transcoding, processing, and packaging is happening. And then from that origin layer, you'll be distributing the stream out into a Wowza CDN or edge servers or multiple edge servers of server-side software doing edge packaging and distribution. That could be over a corporate network. It could be regionally dispersed. And then finally, the players will be connecting into that environment to receive and view the stream.
All right, great. So if you could go to the next slide, Justin. We wanted to just touch really quickly on monetization, since that's obviously the end goal a lot of the time. So by far the most common types of monetization are going to be pay-per-view or advertising. There's also subscription models or sponsorship and even donations for events such as virtual galas. But we've increasingly been seeing customers who do either hybrid models that kind of mix a couple of these different tactics or even add some supplementary means of monetization. And one of these touches on what we were talking about earlier, Barry, with adding additional interactivity to a larger scale broadcast. And I know that we have been, we recently partnered with Zipcan, which is what our blog that we mentioned will be talking about next week, which is an embeddable video chat platform to help enable a kind of hybrid monetization model for a company called Signathon Live. I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit more about their monetization strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a cool use case, right? So what Signathon does is they have, you know, professional athletes, potentially celebrities, things like that, basically hosting a live one-to-many session where they're, you know, being interviewed, talking about things like that. And a fan can buy, you know, a minute or two chat with this celebrity or this athlete, you know, and potentially while they're talking to the athlete, they can see the athlete sign something. And, you know, this is done via, you know, they have the standard one-to-many broadcast, that's the overall event. And then they have an integrated audio chat session with a waiting room concept. So it's a moderated video chat where, you know, someone who is paid can then talk to the athlete for a few minutes, you know, maybe say, hey, could you put this on the item for me? And you can watch them sign it and then, you know, get it in the mail later. So it's a cool use case. It's an interesting way to, you know, better monetize video and create kind of a commerce aspect. And you're starting to see that more and more with what we'll call shoppable video or things, you know, or video commerce, where, you know, an influencer may be broadcasting and then you have the ability to seamlessly kind of buy these items online as they're shopping. And it's really kind of the next generation of what you're going to see with online commerce. And I think it's a pretty cool thing to track and move forward with.
Cool. And then we're running out of time. So Justin, if you could head to the next slide. I wanted to make sure that we touched on Freeman. We had a really interesting case study that you can find on our website. It's in the resources section under case studies. And Freeman went 100% virtual during the pandemic, relying on Wowza's technologies and also our professional services team. So they use both Wowza Streaming Cloud and Wowza Streaming Engine, and were able to leverage some really cool capabilities for their live events. One of them that Barry's mentioned earlier today was embedding multilingual audio and caption selections within their streams. I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit more about that, Barry.
Yeah, so Freeman was a cool use case. They came to us. They wanted to, you know, be able to create a similar experience they had, what they were providing their customers for conferences, union delegations, union meetings, and things like this. And a key requirement of what they had was they had to make these streams as accessible as possible, particularly in the case of these union congresses where, you know, people had to be able to vote and things like that. So they had a requirement that the streams had to be available with multiple language audio tracks as well as multiple language captions tracks. So we were able to put together a platform that was able to seamlessly integrate all of these things and produce a common output in a scalable stream. In this case, it's HLS, that they could deploy this. And we were able to, we enabled Freeman to launch an entirely new product for these virtual event workflows by helping them enable that, the accessibility feature. So it was a really cool product, and it's interesting, since that has come up, we seem to be getting that request more and more and more, as the accessibility is becoming more required for certain use cases.
Awesome. And then we can go to the next slide, since we are about at the end of the hour. If there are any other questions in the queue, Justin?
Yeah, and while I'm asking these questions, I'm gonna relaunch the poll that we had previously. So if anybody wants to go through these questions about what's your current event strategy post-COVID, how many events will you deliver virtually or hybrid in the next 6 months, we definitely appreciate it. Two questions I had that were left was, one, for corporate events, can authentication be done with SSO?
Potentially. The way you would probably do that is you would probably integrate the SSO system into your web application that's producing the player pages, and use some sort of token auth or DRM to connect the two. So it's not out of the box. You're going to have to do some customization there, but there's certainly ways to go about it.
All right. And one other was just a general recommendation. Someone had asked about getting some general recommendations for the encoding ladder and when using H.264 or H.265 as playback.
I'm sure we have a blog post and or article on that somewhere, but there's not a generic answer to that question. It's going to depend on your inbound frame size, your inbound frame rate, your target audience. There may be cases where you want to provide a 7 rendition bitrate ladder. There may be cases where a 3 rendition bitrate ladder makes more sense. So, contact someone either in professional services or one of the sales engineers, and we can give you some advice. There's a ton of articles out there in the world about it as well. I know Netflix has published some things on what they see as their preferred bitrate ladders and things like that. Or you can take all the guesswork out of it and use Wowza Cloud. It's going to do most of that for you.
All right. We did have one question also that came in via email. Is it possible to support multiple languages during a virtual event?
Yeah, that's exactly the Freeman use case. So, the Freeman model is they have a common video stream. They have, I want to say, 11 audio tracks, and I think 7 captions tracks. So all of those get bundled up and output via HLS. And in the player, you can select both whether you want to watch captions or not, and if so, which language, or listen to, you can pick the audio track you listen to.
All right, thank you. And looks like we've only had 7 people respond to the poll, but I'm going to end it now. And if you'd like to see the results, I'm going to share it as well. So you can see many people are definitely looking for hybrid events. And if you're doing that, I hope you contact us. Tracy, did you want to go through these, or should I just leave them there for people to look at?
Let's just leave them there since we're out of time, and we can just wrap up with the final slides.
Okay.
All right, well, that's it, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I do want to mention that we have a guide out that takes a much more comprehensive look at everything we discussed today. It is available for download on wowza.com in the reports and guides section of the resource library, but we're also going to be sending everybody a copy in the follow-up email. And then next slide, as always, we encourage you to contact us for additional information. Here's all of our details. Sales@wowza.com is always a great place to start. And thank you again, everybody. I hope you have a great day.